All things NFL with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. It was a very busy draft weekend, John, but as always, NFL news, the Eagles seem to be at the top of that list all the time. We've got the story now. Sam Bradford is obviously continuing to be in the news because he will not answer his phone or text messages, and now Doug Peterson is kind of hinting that, well, if he doesn't hurry up and get in here, yes, there could be an issue. John, do you anticipate that Sam will come back when the mandatories start?
I do, and he doesn't really have an option. You can start getting fined at that point, and although it's not the same as a training camp fine, it's something he'll probably come in because it's only 3 days. That said, though, I don't think that's the biggest issue. I think the biggest issue is the voluntary stuff, because if you expect to be a starting quarterback in this league, especially, Mike, with a first-year head coach who's installing a completely new offense, if you want to be the leader of that team, you have to be there for the voluntary stuff. And if you look all around the NFL, you will never see a starting quarterback miss voluntary work simply because they understand. Now, maybe a day here and there for a family issue or something of that nature, but not consistent absences. And I think if that continues, Doug kind of intimated it after the draft. He's going to start thinking about, you know what? Chase Daniel already knows my offense. Let's give him a chance to be the bridge, because he'll embrace that opportunity where Sam Bradford is kind of balking at it.
It's surprising to me. Look, I understood Bradford's reason for being angered here. I get it. If they lied to him and he kind of signed that contract under false pretense, fine. But at this point, I'm certainly not on his side here. Does Sam Bradford, in your mind, have another door to open? Is there any other path? They say all the time in the political world, is there a path to victory? Does he have a path to victory in this situation, or is he going to play for the Eagles or nobody?
Well, I'll tell you what, a lot of those paths to victory closed up over the weekend. If you look at some of the logical landing spots, Denver trades up in the draft to get Paxton Lynch. The Jets take Christian Hackenberg in the second round. So it would seem on the surface, at least, you can take those two teams out of the equation, and all of a sudden you start looking around this league. You never say never, and there can always be an injury that would change things very, very quickly. But, yeah, as we stand here right now, it's either play for the Philadelphia Eagles or don't play. And if Sam wants to continue,
that's it, though, right, John? That's it, right? It's Eagles, retire, hold out. I mean, somebody asked me earlier, can the Eagles sue him if he doesn't play under those contract terms? Can they do something? Is it really Eagles, retire, or what?
Well, again, we've seen Howie pull off some miraculous trades in the past. So even though it looks like it's untenable, there's always a possibility you can find somebody, and especially, as we said, once you get into training camp, who knows? You might see a blown ACL for a starting quarterback somewhere. You hope not. But somebody all of a sudden could be in a very, very different situation than they are today. But as we sit here in early May, well, it doesn't look like there's a lot of spots for him. And it doesn't look like there's an opportunity in other places. And I think he kind of has to understand that. Hopefully Tom Condon will sit him down and say, you know what, there are worse things in the world than being a starting quarterback for the NFL for 1 year for $22 million. And if you play well and prove yourself, you'll be in a better position to get a better contract next time around, where maybe you aren't viewed as just the 1 year solution. So I've always thought that's got to be the end game here, but I thought Sam would come down from this emotional standpoint a little bit quicker.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. Yeah, at this point, I just don't see any options for him here unless he legitimately feels that I can't play for these guys. They lied to me. If he sat out or retired, would that kind of indicate that he was really wronged, or do you think he just says, you know what, I made enough money, I don't care?
It could be both, to be honest, because obviously he's made $78 million. He certainly doesn't need the money. He certainly feels wronged by the organization, and by no means do I think that's the correct tack to take, because as I wrote today about the Eagles cutting Jerome Copeland after drafting two potential defensive backs, potential backup safeties, the draft affects everybody, not just quarterbacks. It affects veteran players at every position. And this is the worst time, Mike, to be put on the street as an NFL player, because teams have just cobbled together their 90-man rosters with the draft and undrafted free agency. And all of a sudden, there's certain guys you saw in Chicago with veterans, Antrell Roll, Matt Slauson. It happens everywhere. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the draft as an NFL team, and then after you get your haul, you kind of reassess things. So I don't think Sam has ever really had a leg to stand on to be this upset, but that's not to say he isn't. He obviously is upset, and if he walks away and retires, yeah, I mean, he's not going to get his money. The Eagles could sue him for the signing bonus. So all of that comes into play at that point.
John's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com's John McMullen. The Bradford stuff, the latest, just to update everybody. Doug Peterson says he's had no contact with Bradford since the trade request, and has now furthered that by saying if he continues to sit out, he could be in danger of losing that starting job. This is a fluid situation. We'll keep our eye on it there. John, I want to talk about your piece at 97.3ESPN.com, which everybody listening should take a read to. Good opinion piece on Howie Roseman and where you feel his biggest shortcomings continue to be in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, you look at talent evaluation, and that's what we all question, because I don't think anybody hasn't been a fan of what Roseman has done as far as structuring contracts, as far as the trades of Byron Maxwell to Marco Murray, things like that. He has righted the ship from what Chip Kelly sort of put on this organization from both the personnel and salary cap structure. He's fixed it pretty darn quickly. So he deserves all the credit in the world for that. But then you hit draft weekend, and all of a sudden you start to see some of those old things popping up again, maybe reaching for players, maybe not understanding where values are on the board. Now, when you look at this draft as a whole, Mike, obviously it'll come down to Carson Wentz. If he's a success, this draft is a success. But once you look at the limited opportunities they did have, it seemed that they were taking players a little bit more quickly than they were graded by most of the scouts around the league. Doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong, but you've kind of seen that a little too consistently with this organization, and it's come back to bite them in the past, obviously.
John, the Eagles are going to kind of take a step back now, and they're going to resume their search for a head of personnel, and they basically stopped doing that in February, and there were some people that said, well, they were short on scouts and they were short in that front office. What is Roseman's role? How do you view it moving forward? Is someone else going to be the GM running the draft next year? I mean, was this just like, hey, we want to give Howie a chance to be that guy? Like, what do you make of this, them resuming their search for, what are they looking for?
No, Howie is going to be the GM of this team, and it's, again, people argue semantics, and that's what Chip Kelly used to do. The fact that his title is Executive Vice President of Football Operations. In essence, he's the GM of the Philadelphia Eagles, and he's going to continue to be moving forward. What they're looking for is a head of personnel to run the day-to-day operations of that actual department. So it'll be somebody in that position who will report to Howie, but how he runs the football operations of the Philadelphia Eagles, and he will continue to do so once they make the new hire. The issue was leading up to the draft, this was a bare-bones outfit, and that's what I kind of wrote about, and the fact that you take a kid like Wendell Smallwood, who had all the issues, not only from a legal perspective, but also those untoward remarks on Twitter. And even though the Eagles kind of said they knew about it, by the way they acted, it sure seemed like they didn't know about it. And maybe, just maybe, it was because they were running the bare-bones operation. They didn't have a fully structured staff heading up to this draft, and that might have been one of the issues.
That seems unacceptable, right? I mean, to say that you went bare bones into the draft class basically because you failed to hire someone just seems to me that that's unacceptable.
Well, I agree, but that happens throughout the league when you change regimes. And the Eagles have done it 2 times in a calendar year. So that was the issue. Once they blew out Chip Kelly, you also blow out Ed Manowitz, you blow out most of the personnel department. And they weren't able, because you have to get right to work, they brought in guys who were here before, and they did the best they could, but when you compare it to staffs that have been in place for years and years and years, it's not the same thing. And I think that hurt this organization. But unfortunately, that's what you go through when you make these drastic shifts. The problem with the Philadelphia Eagles and their dysfunctional front office is that they did it twice in 12 months. So really the blame there is not Roseman's. It's Jeffrey Lurie's, who should have held tight against Chip Kelly back in January of 2015.
John, let's look back at the draft and get some of your takes. We know Wentz went Friday. They had no second-round pick. Isaac Seumalo, the guard from Oregon State. They went with 2 linemen. How about it? They went with 2 linemen in the second portions of the draft between Friday and Saturday with Isaac Seumalo and Halapala Vaitai.
Just call him Big V. That's what everybody gets in Novacaire complex calls him. Nobody's trying to tackle that name.
Of the 3 offensive players, Wendell Smallwood, Vaitai, and Seumalo, do you see a starter in there?
I don't see a starter, but I think Smallwood's going to get every opportunity to be a big-time contributor as far as being in the rotation at running back, especially when you consider the history of Ryan Matthews as far as injury goes and things of that nature. I don't think you can expect him to carry the football 25 times every single game and him get through 16 NFL contests. I don't think that's going to happen. So Smallwood's going to get every opportunity to be a part of that backfield and be the change of pace guy. And we'll see how it works out. He's a talented kid. And by the way, he came across very well in explaining some of the issues he's had. But still, there's obviously been a shift in this organization as far as giving people second chances, because it's not only Smallwood, but it's also Alec McAllister and Jalen Mills in the 7th round. They've had some issues off the field, and we all know how Chip Kelly felt about those types of things. So this group is willing to give talented football players a second chance, and we'll see how it works out.
Yeah, can you fill the listeners in a little bit on Smallwood's situation? They had 3 guys there. Mills, another one, who had some red flags, but I know Smallwood pretty well. His story's a bizarre one, to say the least. But if you could fill the listeners in a little bit, why those guys? Mills, too. We talked to Scott Wright earlier. He had Mills rated as his 63rd best player in this draft. The Eagles got him at 233.
Yeah, I really like Mills. I think that could really help this team as far as a backup safety moving forward, because he's got a lot of talent. He's a 4-year starter in the best conference in college football, the SEC. So I think that was probably their best value pick of the entire weekend. Smallwood, as you mentioned, he's a Wilmington native, and he got into some legal problems when he was at West Virginia after his freshman season. He was accused of witness tampering in a murder case. Eventually cleared, but obviously that's a very, very serious charge. And then to compound it, he made some really, I don't know how to describe it, but certainly racial, homophobic remarks on Twitter that once he was drafted, a lot of people knew they were there and started retweeting it. And that was the issue with, did the Eagles know about it? Did they not know about it? But Smallwood, as soon as he was taken, took his Twitter account and deleted it. So one of my first questions was, why did you wait so long? Why didn't you delete it before you got drafted? So clearly, whether it was his agent or the teams looking at him, nobody was aware of this. And if you're a young person, be really, really careful on social media because everybody's watching. And obviously you know him well from being West Virginia, and I'm just glad that Mike Gill and Scott Grayson weren't caught up in that murder case.
I'll tell you, it's a pretty wild story. And as you mentioned, the Eagles had 3 guys in this draft that, it seems to be a shift of guys that, these probably wouldn't be guys in the Chip Kelly era that you would see here. That was something that they typically got away from. And you wonder, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing that they are at least more open to everybody in the draft? Some people this day and age, I don't know how much teams put in stock into what these guys are tweeting.
Yeah, I think they do put a lot of stock in social media, and that was one of my main issues with the scaled down personnel department. Just I don't know if they had the people doing the research on that type of thing that they should have. As far as giving people second chances, I think you have to be open to it. I agree with this version of how they're doing it rather than chips. You can't just completely write off players and young people because young people, by and large, are going to make mistakes. It doesn't necessarily mean they're bad people, especially if it's a one-time thing and they learn from it. So you obviously have to look at each individual case and make a decision and talk with the people. Smallwood, because he's from Wilmington, was at the NovaCare complex, so we got an opportunity to talk to him, and I can tell you he's a really impressive kid. So I can understand why the Eagles spoke to him and said, maybe he made certain mistakes. He admitted he fell in with the wrong crowd in Wilmington when he was very, very young, and he's gotten out of it. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that they've given him the second chance, but you only get 2 chances. And if you continue to make bad choices, then you have to take a look at it down the line and say, maybe we made a mistake. But I agree with this version more than chips.
Another piece that, John, you wrote at 97.3ESPN.com, this was from Carson Wentz's press conference on Friday evening that we carried here on 97.3 ESPN. For those of you who didn't hear it, John, your take on it, you've seen that he really came across, and I've seen people tweet that after that press conference that there's no doubt of this is his team, that, this is he is the guy, he's the guy that they really are backing, that this seems like the guy who is the face of your franchise now.
Yeah, he's really impressive, and for being such a young age and being from North Dakota State, obviously that's not the Big Ten, that's not the SEC, and he's just got a way about him where he controls the room. I joked that he was better in front of the media than a lot of veteran quarterbacks, and you could argue he's better than Sam already as far as how he handles things. And obviously that doesn't mean much, but all we can judge him on right now is answering questions, and he handled everything beautifully. And not only his opening press conference that you guys ran on 97.3, but he also did many television interviews. He had a sit down with the writers afterwards that you didn't hear, and you could see why not only the Eagles, but people like Mike Mayock and all the people that fell in love with him, you could see what they saw, because he really does have a command. He really is very, very intelligent. He got a 40 on the Wonderlic. He's very grounded, and everything from that aspect is as advertised. He's a really, really impressive kid, and you can understand why Philadelphia did what they did.
So the Carson Wentz era, we'll see if it starts a little earlier. This Sam Bradford stuff is still very fluid here. By the way, as we're having this conversation, the Eagles have also now released wide receiver Freddie Martino. So the guys are starting to fall after the new regime is starting to bring some of their own guys in here. Jerome Copeland was released earlier as well. And, John, this is the time of the year where you're going to start to see some interesting veteran names. We saw Connor Barth, the kicker, released after they drafted a kicker down there. So this is kind of we're in the second or third phase of free agency, but now there's going to be that next group of guys that get released after draft day.
Yeah, as I mentioned, with Chicago, it was Antrell Roll, it was Matt Slauson, and that's what I said about Sam being angry.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of the NFL draft. Once you draft guys, all of a sudden it affects veteran players who've been here. And as you mentioned, Jerome Copeland, who was a pretty good special teams player before he got hurt last year, all of a sudden you draft two DBs, and he's not needed anymore. So, and it's the worst time to be put on the street, as you mentioned, because everybody has their 90-man rosters put together. So you sort of have to wait for an opportunity, maybe if it comes to injury or something of that nature, for some of these veteran guys. It's just a very, very cold sport, but at the end of the day, it's business, and that's all it is. It's not personal, and the same holds true for whether it's Sam Bradford or Freddie Martino.
Good stuff. John has more on the Eagles draft class at 973ESPN.com, including some of the undrafted free agents that they've added there that will have a chance to make this team. And mandatory camps will be the big day to keep an eye on. Will Sam Bradford show? He's got about a full month off here, John, before he has to show. So it seems this will be a very fluid situation.
Yeah, and as I said, I think he's got to show before June 7th, or Doug Peterson is going to start seriously thinking about just giving Chase Daniel the opportunity to lead this team moving forward.
All right, John has more at JF McMullen on Twitter. Thanks, John.
Hey, thanks, Mike.